to Ask Fernie. I am Fernando, your spiritual person, intuitive guide. And here on Ask Fernie, we talk about your intuition and developing your own sense of inner being and that inner voice, that inner stillness that you need to make it through life and survive all the craziness that life can throw your way. We also talk about life advice here. Today, we are going to discuss something extremely, what would I say? Not just important, but I think something that a lot of people, don't know a lot about. And anytime I'm discussing or talking about the work that I do with people, inevitably I get a client or someone who asks me about their past lives. What do I know what they were in their past lives? And for honestly, I do tune in and tap into people's past life connections, usually around relationships. I know if people are struggling with the same kind of individual and they're going into cycles with this person and they're repeating patterns of behavior, it's usually because there's some past life issues there that might need to be worked through or that are being worked through and they just don't realize it. But today I have a special guest and I want to bring her on. Her name is Melanie Harrell, and I met Melanie a few years ago when I went to have my own past life regression. This was way back when I was a teenager. I read a book called Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss, and here's the book here. And I was so impressed by this book and the story of one of his patients. Brian Weiss, he was a psychiatrist, a well-known psychiatrist, and he just was blown away by one of his clients or one of his patients, and then I was writing along with them as he wrote his story. So I was so intrigued. I wondered, if this past life thing is real, if it's true, what can I do? I would like to go to Brian Weiss. I would like to go and get a past life regression. Of course, he's up in New York, and I was a teenager, so that wasn't going to happen. But a few years later, when I grown up, I was living here in Houston, and I was looking for someone who did this kind of work. And all I did was type in past life regression and on Google, and the first person that came up was Melanie Harrell, and she's Houston's premier past life regressionist. And I actually think she's one of the top in Texas, if not the top in Texas. So let me bring her on without further ado. Let's bring on Melanie. Let's see. There you are. There you are. Hey, Melanie.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing today? You staying dry?
Is it raining?
It's supposed to be, I think the floodgates are supposed to be opening today, and there's supposed to be massive flooding in Houston. We're supposed to have a repeat Harvey event, according to the news today.
What?
Yeah. I've seen no rain. It's raining right now, but it's not bad at all. So I'm waiting and I'm waiting. I'm like, okay, where's this rain? They keep saying it was supposed to be here at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's supposed to be here by noon. It's now what? We're now into 5 o'clock, so it's not here yet.
Well, my plants would love an inch or two. Let's leave it at that.
Well, so past life regression, you have to tell me how you got into this work, because this is not something that I think you just grow up and say, hey, mom and dad, I'm going to be a past life therapist or past life regressionist. So how did you get involved in this kind of work?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but up until the age of 38, I'd had a very conventional life. Mm-hmm. As a suburban mom, married to an attorney, driving carpools and doing all those traditional things. And then I got hit over the head by the spiritual 2x4. Then it was a 4x8, and finally the 10x20 got my attention. And so long story short, I started having spontaneous past life regressions in the mid-90s, so 20 plus years ago. And I knew what they were, but I didn't know how to process them. And I was having 2 or 3 of these things a day for a period of several weeks, and they were just more like pictures or vignettes or flashbacks. It wasn't really a whole life because I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't know, who you're going to call. I didn't. So ultimately, a few years later, I ended up taking hypnosis training. Past life regression is a hypnosis process. It's not reading like what you do. Right. This is hypnosis where people go within and get the information themselves. So I took hypnosis training and I started out with some stop smoking and good grades and things like that. But once I had my first past life client, that was it. I was hooked and I just love it. So I'm doing it.
Well, good. And I always tell people, because when people ask me, hey, can you tell me what I was in my past life? I'm like, sure, but there really is nothing like experiencing it yourself. And I mean, from my experience, I was completely blown away because it was a memory that was there. I didn't realize it was there until you helped me bring it to the surface. And I was like, what? Okay, well, that's interesting. Okay. And it kind of started to unravel. And it's like you have brain diarrhea. It's all of a sudden, you just have all these memories and thoughts flood in and you cannot stop it. And, you say you were having spontaneous past life memories popping up. For people who don't know what that's like, or if maybe they may be having those experiences themselves, can you give us an example of one of those memories or one of those experiences that you had?
Well, they were all kind of related to the same theme, and they're a little personal, so I'm not going to get too much into it. Right. But they were pictures. Yeah. That's all it was. For some people have the same dream over and over. Mm-hmm. So many people experience past life memories in dreams. Right. Sometimes they'll be in a familiar place, and it's like they're transported back. So those kinds of memories can show up in different ways or not at all. And sometimes people just know that they have a connection somewhere. And if you think about it, why are we attracted to this and not that? How come I love Ireland and I'm not so interested in France,
Right.
Why? There's reasons for those things.
Right. Yeah, I use the example of I've always found myself fascinated with the Titanic, the ship that sank, and I just was drawn to anything to do with the Titanic as a kid. And this was way before the internet. This was way before the movie, and this was just when Titanic was just mentioned in a few books in the library, and I'd have to go and check out some of the books, and I'd just watch the pictures and oh my gosh, I felt so connected to that. And it wasn't until I think it was a year ago that I had the memory just randomly surface while I was dreaming, and it was so vivid, and I saw myself as a completely different person. And so does this happen a lot where people, when they have these memories, that they see themselves as different people, or maybe they hear different types of languages, or they even know a different kind of language when this occurs?
It can happen in all different ways. Sometimes you see the past life through the eyes of that person, so you don't really see yourself as you were. Right. And other times it's in third person where you're observing yourself. Yeah. It can happen all kinds of ways. Right. Even hearing a phrase or seeing something that reminds you can trigger a memory. Right. And some people come in and they don't really have any specific memories that they've experienced. They just know that they have a connection somewhere and they'd like to explore it in hypnosis.
So how do you feel past life regression personally has helped you with your own personal evolution and your own development forward? Because I know you were hooked that first past life regression you had. So I know, how many regressions did you ever end up getting yourself, or did you go through this long ordeal where you did this for several years with yourself just to kind of help yourself understand some things and then moving on to doing it for others?
Well, I truly don't recommend trying to regress yourself. Right. To the experience that I had, I don't think it's a real good idea. 99% of the time, it's fine. Yeah. But you don't want to go into some territory where you need a little extra help. I actually had a wonderful Reiki teacher. I was training with her probably the year 2000, 2001. She's from Arizona. And whenever she worked on me, she never did a Reiki session on me. She usually did past life regressions. It was not connected with Reiki in any way, yeah. But I got so much out of those sessions, and it explained a lot. For example, I was always really drawn to Montessori schools and put my son in a Montessori school, and he attended them until he was in 8th grade. And I saw a past life where one of my friends from the Montessori school and I had a farm school, which was very similar to the kind of schools that we were sending our kids to. And so I had a history of being around that type of educational system. So, that was one really good example. And then Oh, others, I knew I'd been persecuted for doing healing work, and I think it's one reason that I was dragged kicking and screaming into this. I didn't really know where I was going. I just knew that it was dangerous and I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And so once I was able to determine that it was safe to do this kind of work at this point in time, then I got more comfortable with it. But, I was persecuted for it and actually sent out into the forest and banished and shunned. And
Wow.
I went through a lot of stuff like that. And so I'm still very sensitive even today toward being in large crowds.
Right. Yeah.
Sort of triggers that emotion for me. So that's something that I have yet to completely work through, but I know where it comes from.
Yeah. And guys, if you want to ask Melanie a question, we are going to get to a point where you guys can ask her a question, and I will ask her what your questions are, and she will hopefully respond and give you some more insight and clarity into your personal experiences. So if you want to ask about your own experiences, or if you just want to ask about past life regressions or any kind of circumstance where you think you may need a regression, now's the time to ask, and that way when we get to them, I can give her some of those questions. So Melanie, what usually happens during a past life regression? What's a typical experience for a new client?
Well, if this is going to be a private session, typically what I'll do is have them fill out some paperwork in advance and bring it in so that I can get a little information about their history. And then I do a good 15 or 20-minute interview, and I ask a lot of questions because the more I know about my clients, the better job I can do for them. We always set an intention. Sometimes people will come in with something specific they want to look at, and other times they're just curious or going to leave it up to the universe. But the more I know about them, the better questions I can ask. And sometimes if we're working on one thing and something that's related to this other item comes up, then we can take a little detour, deal with that, and come back.
Yeah.
So my sessions last at least 90 minutes for that reason, because I really want to get to know who my client is, what their life is like, anything they want to share with me, fears they have, things like that, so that when they come up, I'll recognize them. Because mostly what I'm doing is asking questions.
Well, I felt very safe and very comfortable in your space, and I felt free to just share. I didn't feel a sense of judgment, which was amazing, and it's super important because so many people don't want to go to others or communicate in this way because they're afraid they're going to be judged or they're going to be critiqued. And sometimes some of the most interesting issues that people have are linked to a past life. I know some people who have phobias may be based in past life experiences or situations.
Right, particularly if it's something kind of unusual.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of situations where people were afraid of bridges, and that's usually an indication. Sometimes people don't like deep water, or it can be all kinds of things, places, relationships that they've had. Yeah. So typically if you've got some kind of fear or something that keeps showing up over and over and you can't explain it from the current life, then that's a good candidate for looking at it from a past life perspective.
Have you ever had sessions where you were working with couples and trying to help them with their relationship using past life regression as a way to understand if there were any past life links to their relationship?
I don't know that I have worked with some couples. I can't recall if we specifically worked on their relationships or not, but what I typically do in that situation is I work with them separately, and if they come in back to back, I'll suggest that the second person not listen to the first one, right, because you have expectations or think it's going to go a certain way if you observe someone else that's connected with you having their regression. Right. So I don't remember if I've specifically worked with a couple on their own issues, but I have worked with some couples that have come in.
Right. It's so interesting because I went expecting to have a conversation or to focus on one specific issue. And when you got me on the table, it's like it went in a completely different direction. And I was shocked and amazed because I wasn't expecting those to be the things that I needed to work on or the areas of my life that I needed to focus on. And it did provide clarity for the other areas of my life, but I was just like, wow, I didn't really know that was an issue I was dealing with or that's something I was trying to work through. So when someone comes in, they spend some time with you, and that's a one-on-one. What's the difference between a one-on-one and a group session? Because I know you do a lot of group sessions. I think it's at Body, Mind, and Soul Bookstore.
Right. We do those every few weeks.
Yeah.
The process is very similar. The main difference is that in a one-on-one, I give individual attention. The whole session is geared toward my client's issue. The questions are geared toward my client's issues, and we have a dialogue.
Right.
So once the person's in relaxation, I'm asking questions and they're verbally responding, and then I take my cues from there and ask more questions. And then ultimately we may clear some energy. It's not enough just to get the information, in my view. You also want to clear up any energy, any emotions that are still here that are pertaining to that past life. So it involves some energy work as well. And it's all very personalized. And then once we're done, then we talk about it and look for patterns and spend about 10 or 15 minutes wrapping it up. In a group, the process is the same, except that it's generic. Usually we have maybe 6 to 12 people in a group. And go into relaxation in the same way, but then I'll set it up so that we see 3 scenes from a lifetime. We look at the death, we look at lessons, unfinished business, gifts, talents, clearing energies. Then we come back and everybody writes down their experiences because, of course, it's in everyone's head since we can't talk out loud with that many people. And then those who would like to share with the group do that. And it's interesting. Some people do better in a group and some people do better privately. Of course, privates are going to be better for deeper, difficult issues. That's not something that you want to do in a group. But what I found is that sometimes people feel like they need to have an answer for me in a private, and so it's better for them to go in a group where they can just do it all in their head and not feel that pressure. Some people just have that as an issue. Other times, people want to have their own private situation and have it really tailor-made to them. And, the person next to you could be breathing loud if you're in a group, and so can't really do anything about that. So just depends on what fits for the person. Sometimes it's a good idea to test out a group beforehand, especially for people who are a little nervous or who haven't been hypnotized before. It's just a good way to kind of get familiar with it before working privately.
Can everyone be hypnotized? Because I know sometimes when I've worked on clients in Reiki setting, they don't immediately open up to the energy or to the exchange, and it takes them a couple of sessions before they get comfortable enough to just let me in so that I can help them. So have you ever had trouble with hypnotizing anyone in any instance?
Yes. It doesn't happen a lot because typically people that show up in my office are predisposed to being able to do that. But for some people, particularly people who like to be in control, it can be harder for them, as you say, to let me in. Because you really do have to trust the person you're working with and just be completely open. And for some people, that's really difficult. I've had a few that tried it out with private sessions and weren't quite able to get there, did a few groups, and then were able successfully to do a private afterwards. So sometimes it's just a question of practicing. I have found sometimes if people just aren't going to go there, some of the people who really like to be in control, I've found they turn into butter on a Reiki table eventually.
Right.
Sometimes people feel like, okay, I have to do something. Am I doing this right? And there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. But sometimes just lying there and being receptive is the way to go. And I have also found that in some cases, my phone went blank. Let's see.
You're good. I can still see you and hear you perfectly.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I have that in some cases I'll start a regression and it actually turns out that the person has to release something from their current lifetime before into the past. And the universe makes those kinds of decisions all the time. So if that happens, we work with what we're presented with. It's up to the universe anyway. We can be polite about it or we can argue, but the universe will have its way. So that happens sometimes that something else needs to be cleared, either a different past life or something from the current life before actually addressing that issue that my clients are interested in.
When people get regressed and they start to go into the past life process, what do people describe? Like what, if you can kind of give us a consensus of what people typically describe that space to be like where are they going? What is that environment like that you've kind of run into over and over again? Are there similarities in some of those descriptions?
Well, what I typically do is set up a sacred space for my clients, and that's a space of their own choosing. So mountain people will go to the mountain. If you like a beach, go to the beach. we start there, and then there are a couple ways that I work with it. Sometimes I take people down a staircase. Sometimes we float up to the sky and then float back down to get into the past life. So there are a couple of different ways to get there. But what I have found is that people vary quite a bit in how they experience it. Some people get visuals, and some people have seen whole movies, and I'm just sitting back writing as fast as I can. I do make lots and lots of notes. Other times people are slower to get the information, and so it may take them a while to register it. Mm-hmm. People don't get any visuals. Some people feel it. Some people even get smells or words that pop into their head. People just have a knowing. So there are lots of different ways to experience the process, and I can't say that any two have really been alike. So that's another advantage toward working privately, because in a group, I have to keep the pacing pretty general. So if someone needs a little bit more time to get into it, that's not something I can really work with in a group.
Yeah. Have people run into their own deceased loved ones when they're going through the hypnosis process, or when they're going through past life regression?
Yes, that can happen in a couple of ways. I always ask them to invite a guide. So sometimes people will invite a loved one that's gone into the light. Sometimes those loved ones will show up in the past life regression as a different character in the actual regression. Sometimes I'll set up a past life regression and people have completely different experiences. And so sometimes they find themselves connecting directly with those loved ones. It happens in groups. It happens, I'm touching my screen every time you see me doing that because it's starting to fade out. It happens privately as well. So sometimes people do want to connect with loved ones, and hypnosis can facilitate that. Yeah. So it happens.
Have people run into celebrities or well-known figures in history during past life regressions? Have you ever had any kind of experience like that?
Well, there are a lot more servants than royalty, first of all.
Yeah.
That's the truth. I tend to get pretty skeptical if someone tells me that they were a famous person. There's 7 billion souls on the planet right about now.
Right.
So I don't think that really happens too often. I had it happen one time, and there was something very off about the session. And a few years later, I thought it was happening again, and I'm thinking, oh no, this client seemed perfectly fine. What's going on here? Well, it turned out that the famous person whose life she was seeing was actually a guide for her. And so she was being given the gift of seeing that lifetime through her guide's eyes. Wow. But it was not her past life.
Right.
There might occasionally be famous people that are incidental to the past life.
Yeah.
But as I said, I see a lot more servants than I do royalty.
And that's what I tried to explain to people last week, because when I had my memory recall from Titanic, I was a maid. I wasn't the captain, or I wasn't, I was a maid, and I essentially was told, because we knew something happened on the ship, and I was told by my supervisor, you need to be, focused on making people comfortable while we get the engines back running or something. So I was okay. So I'm there just doing like kind of an inventory check while the ship is sinking, and I'm just there with the other girls doing inventory. And then when the dishes all started to get a little, tilted, we're like, something's wrong. And no one ever came to tell us that something was wrong with the boat. We had to figure it out on our own. So it was just, it's kind of funny, because I'm like, oh, here I am doing inventory while the Titanic is sinking. And I'm like, okay, that's my big experience with being on the Titanic. So that's very.
It's funny now, but you may have at the time brought over, concern that needs to be cleared. Yeah.
That's hilarious. So what is your favorite, what's one of the weirdest things that have ever happened during a past life regression with a client?
Well, I have a couple stories I can share with you, and I want to mention that these are stories that I either have approval from them to share an interview, or they're actually on my website. I do not share people's stories even without their names, because
I think that's amazing and wonderful, because people don't realize that everything that they see online with me, I've had to get written approval and people to give me their permission to share that. And sometimes when I'm talking to someone on the phone or doing a video call, people, oh, don't put my stuff on YouTube. I'm like, oh, don't worry. Those people specifically signed up to be on camera. Everything is confidential. And, when we had our session, there were some very intimate things I shared with you. And I love the fact that you are very private in that way, that you don't, put all of that information out there, and people can feel confident in coming to you that their information isn't going to just be put anywhere. So I'm grateful for you to do that for people.
Well, I'll tell you exactly where it goes. It goes on paper in folders in my desk drawer.
Yeah.
It doesn't line.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not quite as techy as some. Well, one that I really got a lot out of personally was a woman came in, and she was, kind of like a church lady, really, I would describe her. And I was surprised to see her in my office because, I usually get the new agey folks. And so I was surprised to see her. And when we did the past life regression, it turned out that she had been an inquisitor. And I have been very judgmental, having been banished more than once by inquisitors for doing healing. And so it turned out that as she shared her story, she had been forced into this role. And her father was a minister. And again, I have to tell this. Her father was a minister, and she did not want to go into that calling. And so she had run away as a teenager, who was actually a young man. So the young man ran away. Family found him. The father beat him up for running away, and he was forced to go into the ministry, which he didn't want to do. And he eventually found himself in the position of being like a hired gun, and these communities would hire him to come in and find if somebody was a witch or not. And then they would, basically it was about a land grab. It wasn't really about being witches. They would target people who had land that they wanted to steal.
Yeah.
So this was his job, but he tried to be, somewhat honest about it. Anyway, he found himself working in one community where they were going to do a land grab, and he didn't find any guilt on the person's part. And he was told that he'd be killed if he didn't find the person guilty. Yeah. So he went ahead and went through with it, but then after that, he stopped. And I had a real epiphany, maybe more so than my client actually, because, it never occurred to me that anyone would be forced into that role and that they didn't just relish it and think it was wonderful. But in that particular case, that was not something that person had wanted to do. And what was also fascinating about that is, and I find this a lot, I don't really notice people speaking in accents or different languages. The idioms they use, the figures of speech that they use. I don't remember. She said something about he was a man and he was married. His wife was a good and faithful wife, or something like that, which we wouldn't use that kind of terminology today. So it's real interesting to hear the figures of speech come through. So in that particular case, I may have gotten more out of that session than my client did. It was very helpful to me to let go of some of my tendencies to judge people.
Well, I'm sure that was set up by the universe, trying to help you, not only help the client, but also helping you with your own past life trauma from being persecuted.
Well, yes, I think that's exactly right. So I was, very grateful to her for coming in and grateful to her for giving me permission to share it.
Wow. And you said you had another story too.
Yes, this is one that I really like too. And actually, this is someone that I saw several times. And this was not her first past life regression, although she was my first past life client. So I'll be grateful to her. But she had an opportunity to go to England. This is a mother of four. She's from Mexico, lives here. And she was given the opportunity to go to England because she had a child who was going to play in a soccer tournament over there. And she didn't want to go. This is a well-traveled, cosmopolitan type of woman. Yeah. Didn't want to go. And she couldn't figure out why. And she started waking up at night with these strange pains in her neck and these red marks. She goes to the doctor. She goes to the chiropractor. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with her. And meanwhile, time's marching on, and she's supposed to go to England with her daughter, and she doesn't want to go. So finally she came in to see me, and it turned out that she had had a past life as the daughter of a Native American chief here in the States. And this was the time when it was being colonized by the British. And so she arranged to go to England to try to get better treatment for her people. They were not being treated well. And so she went over to England, and she stayed with this man who was, I think, the one that was supposed to help her. And he had a daughter who was really sick. And so my client, as the Native American, was able to use herbs and her healing knowledge to help this child get well. Mm-hmm. So anyway, she's on her way back in the ship, and the sailors were mistreating her. She was strapped to some kind of a barrel, and there was an explosion, and some kind of metal slashed into her neck, which explained the marks and the discomfort that she had had.
Right.
So she survived that. Ultimately, the settlers killed her anyway. And she made a remark during the process about how she thought English was a really difficult language. So we got through that and let go of all of the issues that she had brought with her. She was able to go to England just fine. It turned out that the girl that she had healed in England was her soccer child. Wow. This life. And to this day, her English isn't very good. 4 languages.
Wow.
But it's been very good.
Wow.
So that was a really great one because, there was a physical manifestation of that particular one, and the physical manifestations went away once we did the past life, and she lost the fear of going to England too. She'd been all sorts of other places, but she did not want to go to England, and that was why.
Do you find that people have connections with their birthmarks or where their birth markings are in conjunction with past life memories?
I've seen that maybe once or twice. It's not something that I have heavily investigated, but I think there is a correspondence there, so it wouldn't surprise me, and I've seen it a couple times, yes.
Oh, interesting.
And then I find a lot of times that people will have injuries or parts of their body that give them challenges in this lifetime, and it corresponds with something that happened in a past life, so that whatever happened to them before hadn't quite healed up.
Wow. Well, I love your job. I love what you do. I think that you help a lot of people. I think that you have added immense value to my life for sure. What do you get from the work? What's your favorite part of the job now? I mean, you've been doing this for quite some time now, and so what is your favorite part of the job?
Well, I like it because every situation is different. I can pretty much describe how the session's going to start and end, but I don't know what's going to happen in the middle. And the challenge for me is asking the right questions. I am not really a psychic like you are. And so for me, my job is to ask the right questions and notice the patterns and put the pieces together so that the past life makes sense in context of what my client came in for. I like to make sure it's wrapped up and the bow is tied and the story makes sense. And so for me, that's really fun. I was a big Nancy Drew fan when I was a kid, so I guess I like detective stories. And I feel like I'm a detective in a way, asking all the right questions.
Wow.
So it's fun. It's never the same twice.
Have you ever met anyone who had a past life where the Egyptian pyramids were being built? Or because, we've got all these world mysteries where how were the pyramids built? And what happened in South America with the pyramids there? And what about Atlantis? Have you ever encountered those kinds of situations with past life regressies?
I have. I can't remember the specifics of any of them. I do remember though, sometimes particular topics tend to tend to come all at once. I remember I had 3 French revolutions in a span of about 2 weeks and none before or since.
Wow.
That's another thing that's really interesting is that, you're up close talking to someone who experienced the history that you've read about in history books.
Right.
So that's really fascinating. And I don't generally suggest that people go overboard trying to verify the past life.
Yeah.
And I haven't really had any situations where people were able to find their own character. But a lot of times people will remember obscure historical details. Uniforms are a great example. You can a lot of times verify a uniform just on the internet.
Right.
And so some of that's really interesting to do. So that's, kind of some validation because I have to admit I'm kind of a skeptical person. When I'm in it, I'm doing this work and I'm totally there. And then after everything's over and my client's gone home, I'm like, did that really happen? I still have that happen sometimes, but people get better when we do this kind of work. So as long as it's working, I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I think when I had my memory surface, I went looking for records. I'm like, this isn't going to be as easy as they make it out on these programs and these TV shows. Uh-oh. Let's see. Did I lose you? See, I think I lost Melanie, or I'm on hold. There we are. I got you back.
You still there?
Yeah, I'm here. You're good
Okay.
to go. Yeah, funny. Yeah, it's easier. I mean, you watch these programs and these shows where people talk about past life regressions, and then they go back and do the research, and I'm like, how did they do that? How did they find all those details? I went back trying to find details about my own experiences, and they were so hard to find, which is very interesting because I know in one of my past life regressions with you, I worked for the Maharaja. And within a month, someone actually gave me a gift that belonged to a Maharaja. So I was like, what? So it was very interesting to have that happen. And I mean, I didn't even know really what a Maharaja was until I had my experience with you. So it was just so cool to have that validation. I think the universe does a good job of validating us sometimes when we don't have the physical, factual paper in front of us that tells us about the specific lifetime.
Yeah, and it's hard to do that. And remember, when we see that on television also, they've screened probably hundreds and hundreds, and they've got a paid staff that can go out and fly anywhere and do that documentation. And so, there are some very dramatic cases, and I'm sure they're true.
Yeah.
For me, I'm less interested in documenting it, although it's pretty cool when it happens, and more interested in making sure that my clients get what they came for and that they feel better, and if they were stuck, that they can move on, whatever it is that they're looking to improve about their lives, because ultimately it's a way of healing and working with energy.
Yeah. So, have you ever? I totally forgot. Oh, do you? I was like, I totally lost my train of thought. Do you think everybody is meant for a past life regression? Because I know some people really want to do one. Some people think that would help them. What makes a good potential client? What makes a good potential regressee?
Well, someone who's open to the process. A lot of times, as I said, people will have particular issues that keep recurring, some kind of a pattern that they've worked on. They can't figure out what the source of it is. So if there's something really puzzling that keeps happening over and over, then past life regression might be a good avenue. Really anybody with some kind of curiosity. But those who don't believe in it, don't want to do it, I don't pursue that or try to persuade anybody. People who are meant to do a regression will find me or someone that can help them, and they'll just do it.
Right. Very good. I've got a few questions here from some people. I've got one from Kimberly. Let's see. Kimberly's question is there a minimum age when it comes to doing a regression?
Oh, that's a great question. So I have worked with some children, of course, with parental okay. I had one 10-year-old. Her mom came with her. I always have the parents come and filmed her. She went to about 10 past lives in one session, which is by far, usually it's one.
Yeah.
That was saying, this was the life, this was the lesson. This was the life, this was the lesson. It was incredible. With some teenagers. I have actually, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a minimum age. My teacher always said 14. I've worked with some children younger than that. They have to want to do it, and there has to be some really good reason to do it. I have on a couple of occasions used a parent as a surrogate for a past life. There was a 2-year-old once who was having bad dreams, and there's no way to regress a 2-year-old, but I was able to regress his mom, and it turned out she was in that life too. And so we were able to get to the source of it, and the dream stopped.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think it really depends on the child. Some of these young children now are, really mature. So it's an individual kind of thing. But in most cases, I would want the parent in the room. If it's a teenager, 15, 16, and they don't want mom or dad in the room, that's okay. I always have the parent sign the paperwork, and, so.
Right. I've got another question from Rebecca, and she says, in my childhood, I always had the same dream about a man chasing me. It was always the same dream and the same feeling. As an adult, I haven't had that dream. I wonder if that has anything to do with my past life. And so do you know if people will stop having past life memories surface after they reach a certain age, or when they begin to reach a certain age, they will start having past life recall occur. Do you know if age plays a role in that?
Well, I think in some cases it does. I had a few years back a couple of teenagers whose moms, they were not connected. The moms brought them in because they were starting to lose interest in schoolwork, getting despondent, and it turned out that both of those young people, again, they were not connected. They came in about 6 months apart. Both of those young people had taken their own lives in their lifetime, and it was about the age that this started happening. So sometimes the age you were when the event happens in a past life will trigger memory. And I've seen it the other way too. I think that very young children remember their past lives, and then they kind of grow out of it, or we don't acknowledge it, and so they don't remember it as much. So I've had some people come in saying that they had this dream a lot when they were a child. They don't have it as often now. And I've had the reverse too. Some people have a dream that starts. So it can happen any one of a number of ways. Many times, though, repetitive dreams can lead us to a past life.
Yeah. You know, I in dealing with the mediumship part of my work, whenever I've had to connect with someone who took their own life, what tends to happen afterwards, which is something that I've never heard about, but part of their atonement or part of their making peace with what has happened is they have to serve someone who's in life who is going through a similar process and try to help get them out of that place so that they can move forward with their lessons and their own experiences. So they kind of have to act as a voice of inspiration. And, you know, some people describe, oh, I was going to, you know, pull the trigger, and then I heard a voice that said, don't do it. You have a lot to live for. Don't do it. And it turns out usually it's someone who has already done that themselves. So that's part of their quote unquote payback to make amends for what they did for them to themselves with others who are still alive. So I've run into that quite a few times, and I'm like, well, that's just an interesting phenomenon that tends to happen with people who've done that. So
yeah, it can happen that way. I've seen, interestingly, say you've got someone with a difficult relationship. Sometimes the same pattern repeats over and over. Other times, one person will pick on the other one, and then it'll switch, and then it'll switch back, and it's, you know, until one person breaks the pattern.
Right.
So it can happen a lot of different ways. Sometimes it keeps repeating, and sometimes, as you said, you're there to assist someone else to clear that karma that you're carrying. So it can happen in lots of different ways, and that's one reason, you know, it's just so interesting to see how people's lives are unfolding and how their evolution is working.
Let's see. I've got another question here. People were like, what is my past life? I'm like, well, you have to go see her first, people, if you want to know about your past life. Okay, so I've got a good question here from Joanne. And her question is, how do I sign up for a past life regression? I always feel like my life will be short. Wonder if this is from past life experiences.
Oh, could be that it's from a past life. So there are two ways to do a regression. If you want to do a group, then you would go to the Body, Mind, and Soul website. It's bmshouston.com, I think, on the calendar.
Yes.
And the group we have is on a Monday morning, April the 9th. And then the next weekend we have, the next weekend group, I believe, is April 29th, which is a Sunday. We do them every few weeks at Body, Mind, and Soul. Mm-hmm. And if she wants to do one privately, she can go to my website, which is MelanieHarrell.com, and just send me an email, and then we'll schedule something.
And you've got quite a few other upcoming classes. I know on you've got April the 7th and 8th, you've got First Degree Reiki as well. Because not only are you a regressionist, but you also do Reiki and a few other things. And then you've got you got the April 9th one, the April 29th one, and then you've also got St. Michael's Sword, Protecting Yourself and the Planet. What is that?
Well, that's something completely different. That's a class that works with St. Michael's Sword as a means of protecting ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's a hypnosis process. Most of the classes, well, not all of them, but that particular class is a hypnosis process where I take people into relaxation to connect with Archangel Michael. He gives you your version of the sword, and then we practice ways to work with it for, bringing positive energy and clearing negative energy. Yeah. So that's the fun class too.
Wow.
And that's Body, Mind, and Soul.
And Body, Mind, and Soul Bookstore. And I think Body, Mind, and Soul Bookstore is right off of I-10, correct? It's like kind of where, is it going towards that IKEA? I think that's the IKEA is going that direction, isn't it?
It's it's across the highway from IKEA.
Yeah.
Their address is 7951. So it's between Antoine and Chimney Rock.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, Body, Mind, and Soul Bookstore is one of the premier metaphysical and spiritual bookstores in Houston. They used to be located in Highland Village. Actually, my office used to be right across the street from them, and then I ended up working from home, and they moved to another location there. And we've got, we've got Kevin. Kevin's still with Body, Mind, and Soul Bookstore, I think, and we've got Denise there as well. So quite a few group of people there. And it's definitely a place if you want to go to find some answers. It's a good starting point, in my opinion. So I've got another question here from Steven, and it's, I have a huge fear of fire trucks. Can that be from a past life?
It certainly could be. Why that and not a police car, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if there's anything from your current life that would make you afraid of fire trucks, then there's a possibility that it could be from a past life. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one last question. I think this will be our last one before we wrap up, and it's from Wendy. And Wendy asks, do you have to be in person to do it? Meaning, does she have to go and see you in person, or is there a way to do like a video, a Skype, or a phone session?
Well, now that Fernie spent about an hour with me yesterday showing me how to do Skype, I can do them on the phone, have done them on the phone, and apparently I can do them over Skype because my phone works for it now because I had expert guidance. So, yes, I think it's better to do it in person. However, if there's some reason that you can't get there, if you're from out of town or something like that, I can do them over Skype or the phone. Yes.
Yeah.
But
very good. Very good. Well, I have really enjoyed our time together. I think so many people do not know enough about past life regressions. And I'm always recommending, hey, maybe you need to go see Melanie because she can help you understand some of this stuff. I mean, I can tell you what I think and what I feel, but there's nothing like having that one-on-one direct experience where you get to see it yourself, you get to feel it yourself, so that you can really move through that issue and move forward into having a better life, because that's what it all comes down to, is just having a better life.
Exactly.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for being my guest. I really appreciated you and all the work that you do. And I'm sure I'm going to have you on here again because I think there's so much more we could talk about. Thank you all for tuning in. I am so grateful that you guys tuned in to Melanie and are becoming more aware of just past life regressions, and just one more tool, one more thing you can do that will help you to know more about yourself, know more about who you are, where you come from, and what is there. So for those people who want to connect with Melanie, the information is right there in front of you. Just go to www.melanieharrell.com, and all of her contact information is there along with all of her services. And if you want to attend one of her classes, and I'll put that up really quickly once again, just go over to her website, and she's got all of these classes listed, and you can pick the one that you want to participate in, whether it's a group session or a one-on-one. Melanie, thank you so much for being here, and I will look forward to our next time being together here on Facebook.
Me too. Thanks, Bernie. This was fun.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And for everybody else, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.